So this video is going to be a bit different. I'm going to spend the next 24 hours with this sketchbook, and we're just gonna see what happens. I decided to start off by finishing off this sketch. I figured it would be a good warm-up, just to kind of loosen up my hand a bit before I went into sketching other things. As you can see, the sketch was pretty well finished. I just went in and refined the lines, kind of outlined it with a mechanical pencil, and definitely created more of these hair strands before going in and adding some color to the background. I also decided pretty early on, just for my health and sanity, that I would do 2 12-hour days instead of actually completely going straight through for the 24 hours. Which, when you think of it, a 12-hour straight, basically, drawing day is still a ton of drawing. So if you want to try out this challenge, I would definitely not suggest you try and pull an all-nighter and completely continue drawing straight for 24 hours. It's not the best for you, so don't feel bad breaking up the 24-hour idea of just continuous drawing over a few days. You could even do more than 2 days. I just decided that to still have it be more of a challenge, having 2 12-hour days would still be a lengthy drawing day where I could completely focus the entire day on this sketchbook and creating whatever I wanted without absolutely killing myself with staying up all night. So for the background, as you can see here, I decided to actually play around with some acrylic gouache, which I haven't really had a great chance to really play with too much, so that was another great bonus to doing this kind of sketchbook challenge, is I got to play around with a bunch of supplies that I just hadn't had an opportunity to do yet. As you will be able to see in the next few sketches that you will see that I did in this book, I was really into the black and white shaded drawings with a colored background, and they were super easy, super fast. It's a really easy and cool thing to do in your sketchbook because obviously it doesn't take a great amount of time to just add some color to a background with just having a nicely shaded pencil sketch, but it definitely makes the artwork stand out. After that warm-up, I decided I wanted to go and use some of these colored coal erase pencils and do just some face studies. So another thing that I was really into doing for this 24-hour period was kind of this low-key realism, sketchy, cartoony type look. I don't know. I was still using photo reference, but I wasn't too concerned about it being super realistic, so I was kind of trying to play around and push a style a bit onto these characters without losing the recognition of who it was. So this whole page I decided to do of Villanelle sketches from Killing Eve, if you're familiar with that character. So I just picked a few different looks and poses and just kind of played around with a bit of a style, but like I said, still keeping some realism there, but not worrying too much about it, and just kind of creating a bit more of a cartoony look to these characters. I think these particular sketches helped me a lot because I found that they took me a significantly less amount of time, but they are still pretty realistic and they're definitely recognizable for who they are. After that, I decided I wanted to do something super cartoony. As I'm sure you've seen from the past few videos, I've kind of talked about it and I've done artwork. I've been super into Orphan Black lately, and I wanted to kind of possibly create something that I might end up eventually turning into some sort of t-shirt design or something for my Redbubble, which originally was the concept when I started this, but normally for things that are this cartoony, I would do them digitally, and ultimately it was originally just the central cartoony design of the two characters, and then I just decided to go in after and add some background elements. They kind of were very lonely on the page, which I did like how this turned out. I'm being really into drawing helixes lately, and I'm apparently quite good at it. I've just turned into a helix drawing master. There was a bit of a time jump there, as you saw, where I added some more background elements, and I'm just coloring it in here with a bit of watercolor. Really, for this whole challenge, I just wanted to take a decent chunk of time to really just draw whatever I wanted. Whether that was realistic stuff or more cartoony things, I was just kind of all over the place with the different styles that I was trying out, which I don't think that's a bad thing. I personally don't find that I really have one particular style that I really want to settle down and completely just stop there and do that from like now to infinity. I really enjoy having quite a few different styles. You can probably tell, obviously, I do some more Art Nouveau things sometimes. Some things are more watercolor and splashy, and these ones were just kind of the random in-between ones of whatever else. I'll be going through all of the sketches later, but this particular page was just watercolor and then some fine liner, which the particular ones I was using for this one were just a Prismacolor in varying tip dimensions. Going back to my favorite of watercolor and fine liner was great, but I really wanted to play around more with some acrylic gouache. So I decided to section off these 4 panels with some masking or painter's tape, and I just really wanted to kind of do some doodly patterns. So I started off with completely coating the area in just a solid color of acrylic gouache, and then I took each area and just kind of doodled random patterns. So this first one, as you can see, is kind of a palm leaf design, just free-handed brush work, which I don't get a chance to do a lot. So yeah, I really was happy with how this page turned out, and it was really fun to do for a change. Normally, I'm obviously doing portraits and realistic stuff, and definitely nothing kind of along the lines of patterns or just any sort of random doodle or a nature-y type thing like this. And the color palettes actually have a funny story too. I was on Twitter and someone had taken all of the season intro slides, or whatever you want to call it, the like title cards from season 2 of Killing Eve, and they have a very appealing color palette, so I used some of those as inspiration for these color palettes. So if you're wondering kind of why they might look so visually appealing, just kind of with the different color schemes, that's where these color schemes were from, which, you know, take color scheme inspiration from anywhere. Obviously, with the second panel, I was continuing with the more floral and nature kind of design, but for this one, I had saved this really cool, like, Japanese wave design, which I really love, like, the style of, like, woodblock line art and Japanese prints like this, and so this one was a lot of fun for me personally to do. It's a lot of really smooth lines and curves, which is always fun. That's kind of the reason why I love doing Art Nouveau so much. You know, the filigree designs and things are really fun to draw. This last one was extremely random. At this point, I was just kind of overdoing these designs and I kind of wanted to move on to something else. So I did this random like fan design. Originally, I was going to do more of the like circular Asian pattern, but I decided to just kind of wing it with this random fan pattern. For the next part, I wanted to go back to something a little more realistic and also use my 2 pencil method, which I know when I mentioned and like demonstrated and talked about it in my Orphan Black artwork, a lot of people were really interested in it, and it's really simple. Basically, all you need is some toned paper, which as you can see for this one, I just took a decent like medium to light wash of a watercolor paint. And the 2 pencil method is basically you have a white colored pencil and a darker colored pencil. So for this I did use black, although normally it would probably be something more like sepia or just a dark brown to keep it natural, depending on kind of the tone of the paper that I'd be drawing on. And basically, you just go in, and for me personally, I normally like to go in with the white first and kind of draw in or color in the lightest and whitest parts of the face or whatever, and then go in with the dark color and start off with like the blackest points, you know, kind of your value range between the 2 pencils, and then kind of shade it in between. The other video was definitely a better demonstration of this method, but that's kind of just the gist of it. For this particular one, I wanted to keep the hair a little more illustrative based and a little more liney, not so much realistic. Although it is still realistic, I just kind of wanted to have a more illustration flair to this particular drawing. For the next page, I wanted to do kind of more of a simple silhouetted landscape, so I started off by taping around the edges, which, as a quick tip, just by like masking taping and just creating a border in your sketchbook, like immediately makes everything look so much more put together, other than just because I was planning on using like a fairly decent amount of watercolor on this painting. Having the edges of my sketchbook taped down to like minimize the warping was a good idea anyway, but just the white edges in a sketchbook, like a nice clean border, definitely is very visually appealing later. So I started this just by doing like a pretty simple gradient. I just had this like image of this like very warm landscape, which was pretty much just these like very simple warm colors and then some minimal line work after and just a lot of silhouettes. So this really did not take me very long. I just kind of went in a couple of times to deepen some of the areas up, but it pretty much is just a solid gradient with a bit of shadow here and there, and then just the line work with this pen I've been really obsessed with. It is a 0.25 millimeter Muji pen, which the only bad thing I can say about it, if it's really a bad thing, is that it's not waterproof, which is why I'm doing all of this later, but I've been really obsessed with these pens. The benefit of it being a ballpoint pen as opposed to a fine liner is you can really get in there and scribble, which is what I was doing here. And then of course, just removing the tape, you have this super clean looking illustration. This was a result of another one of those kind of low-key realistic / stylized studies, I guess you could call them, which this actually ended up turning into like one of my favorite pages. I'm just really happy with how these characters turned out. They're obviously the two main characters from Killing Eve, and you can definitely still like recognize who they are, but it's not realistic really. I don't know. I was just really happy with how these two turned out. So as you can probably tell from this theme of the sketchbook, the background was a mixture of a couple of acrylic gouache colors, and then I mixed up this custom acrylic ink color. I just had this kind of magenta color that I wanted to lighten up, so it's just a mix of that and some white acrylic ink to create this interesting pink kind of color. I thought it would be interesting to try outlining some characters in a very bold ink color as opposed to just kind of your normal black or very dark colors. And then of course I decided to add the very prominent line or just kind of script from the show, the sorry baby with the X, bit of splatters around, and then I decided to take some of the extra ink and just kind of shade them in minimally, or more of a cell shading kind of look. Now this was the last page that I did of the second 12-hour period, which at this point, I'm not sure what I was like doing that day, but I was just like really tired by when I had originally sketched these up. So I actually decided to kind of cut the day a little short and finish them up the next day, which is why it's so much brighter and why they're a bit wonky. Just because my eyes were like completely dead by this point, which the next day I was a bit better, so they probably turned out better by waiting a bit to finish them up. But I really just kind of wanted to do more of a black and white shaded look and just some watercolor, like loose watercolor for the background, because I hadn't had a chance to do it that far, and so that was the result. And now for the flip through of all of the different illustrations that I did over this 24-hour period, because I didn't actually get a chance to film all of them. This first one was, of course, the illustration that I ended up finishing the sketch up of. So that's not like a complete 100% part of this kind of challenge. And then, of course, you have the character studies and the cartoon page, which the eyes were there before. It was just the 4 character studies and then of course the full other page. Next is the pattern page, which definitely ended up being one of my favorite pages from this experiment. Those are of course 100% acrylic gouache. Then you have the 2 pencil challenge thing and the landscape. The illustration on the left was just watercolor with Prismacolor colored pencils in white and black, and the landscape was just watercolor with the Muji pen that I talked about earlier. The illustration on the left was one of the first ones that I didn't actually end up filming. It was completely done in that 0.25mm black Muji pen. And then of course you have the Killing Eve cartoonish illustration, which was a mixture of acrylic gouache and then acrylic ink. Now both of these pages were ones that actually I might have filmed, but they were both really boring footage, and these were definitely a couple of the more rough pages. The purple illustration on the left, I was actually trying to use a new brush pen, which was going interestingly. I was also just really tired at this point. It was at the end of the second day and I'd just been drawing a ton already, and so my eyes were just kind of dying. Although I was really happy with how the succulent illustration turned out. That was just free-handed with the Pentel brush pen, which I have fully rediscovered and am fully in love with again. I swear you can do the most random scribbles with that thing and it will turn out beautifully. So the succulents I know I didn't end up filming just because I'm pretty sure I filmed the purple half face and it was just a disaster, and so I just didn't bother filming the next thing because I thought it was going to turn out equally as awful, but I actually ended up really liking the succulents. And as for the illustration on the right, it was kind of a combination with what I'd been doing with the black and white and acrylic gouache sketches, but also messing with a very distinct and bold silhouette, and also using the Pentel brush pen. So that's what the black ink is. I also, I'm pretty sure, ended up shading the face a little with some mechanical pencil, but just acrylic gouache in some interesting colors to kind of fade it down, and then the Pentel brush pen for the black ink. And then the final page was just the 2 solo characters, the black and white sketches with the watercolor. Another experiment with the kind of cartoony / playing with a bit of the realism type style. And those are all the illustrations that I did in the 24-hour period. Hopefully you found this video interesting. Maybe it's inspired you to kind of do a 24-hour sketch or drawing challenge of drawing whatever you want. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.